It's a good year.
The crowd is absolutely wild as Vern Gagne's All-Star Wrestling goes coast to coast and continent to continent. The greatest wrestlers in the world.
He may be an apprentice carpenter, but I guarantee you he is a seasoned ring veteran.
I've been hit with bar stools, bar rags, barmaids.
I'm talking to you.
They're scared that Hulkamania's still running wild. Oh, yeah. I got a big fat wife and 9 kids at home, and I gotta feed them.
And take a look at Jesse the Body in real life.
Open your hand once if you would.
You want to see it?
This is absolutely unbelievable. Totally, completely out of control.
He's coming in over the top. Hey! Look out!
Welcome in, AWA Unleashed. We like to say we're preeminent. You can say whatever you want, but I say we're preeminent. Mick Karch, I think he says we're preeminent. Polish Joe, I think he says we're preeminent. Agreed?
Right. Damn right, buddy.
Yeah. Okay.
That works.
Okay. You know, as I was listening to that open, kind of one thing that we were talking about on our live chat last Sunday night, and by the way, if you want to get in on the live chat, we had some brand new members that got into it for the first time, and I was excited to see them. But we talked about the ability to ad lib and how that's kind of a lost art in today's wrestling business. Mean Gene, I felt, was an artist when it came to the ability to ad lib. And I think that open where he might be, you know, a carpenter, but he's a seasoned ring veteran, brilliant. Things like that, I feel like the business is lacking.
It totally is. The business is completely choreographed now from A to Z because it's not a sport, not presented as a sporting event anymore, Chris. It's a TV show. It's a weekly sitcom or, you know, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, Gene was absolutely the master. And what I loved about Gene is when somebody would screw up and Gene would try so hard to stifle his laugh and he just couldn't do it. Good stuff. Gene was the master.
When Gene took over for Marty, and I mean, this will lead us into around 1975, because it was around that time, I believe, that Mean Gene at least started inching into being the interviewer rather than Marty O'Neill. And at first I was apprehensive because, what do you mean? Marty O'Neill, Marty O'Neill is going to be here forever. Well, that's in the eyes of a 10-year-old kid in 1975. The whole concept of, what do you mean he's too old to do this? He's still alive. He can do it. But anyway, Mean Gene, incredible. You know, his talent and his one-liners made him the character that he became.
Yep.
Yep.
Yes, sir.
Speaking of characters with you guys, and you mentioned 1975, which might be the most glorious year in all of years. We'll get to that in just a minute. But we do have some business to take care of, so fast forward to the 5-minute and 22-second mark in 3, 2, and 1. Okay, we do have the Pinfall membership, which is a $4.99 weekly. Or not weekly, a $4.99 monthly. With $4.99 weekly, you'd still be getting your money's worth, frankly.
Damn right. Yes, sir.
You get live streams, you get exclusive interviews, you get our watch-alongs, you get letters, you get personal information, you get a lot of good things. So yeah, $4.99 a month for our Pinfall membership. I still need to get a graphic made because I got to get the information to Joe. And you're going to get a 5-pack of pictures from Mick. So again, highly, highly recommend that. And then as well, guys, we've got tpublic.com. That is our brand new merchandise website. You can get mugs, you can get T-shirts, you can get phone cases, you can get hats, you can get pretty much anything that you want at tpublic.com. You can get Slick Mick merchandise, get AWA Unleashed merchandise. Just a lot of good things. So a couple of different ways to help support your favorite AWA podcast. or you can support us either way.
Yes, sir.
If we're not if we're not your favorite AWA podcast,
Are there any others?
I don't know.
You know, it's easy to win a championship where you're the only team playing in the league. But damn it, we are the champions.
Well,
Yeah, I think we're the only one. Yeah.
The funny thing about that is AWA Unleashed is very similar to what the AWA was in 1975. The only show in town.
There you go.
Right.
I like it. I like it. Okay, so now to the most glorious year in the history of the world, 1975. Because the world was graced with the presence of McCarthy and Joe Chuba. So before we get to that, because you guys were around, let's get to a year ago today, guys.
God.
You mentioned this on the live stream. Time just doesn't slow down, and this is not something new, but I think it's something, Nick, that you definitely want to acknowledge.
Yeah, our friend Adnan El Casey, the old sheik, about a year ago passed away, and I can't believe it has been 1 year. The guy had a presence. What a terrific picture of him. Some people have said he looks like Cesar Romero in the old Batman series, and that he does. But a glorious, glorious individual with a laugh that could absolutely tear down a room. And the fact that it's 1 year, and I said this when Adnan passed away, you know, it's kind of a morbid thought, but as I'm at the surface and I'm looking at Adnan, he looked terrific. You know, I mean, it was an open casket service, but he looked great. And you're just waiting for him to come, you know, sit up in that casket, pull out the sword and say, you motherfucker, you know, and God bless him. And he is missed dearly. One of my great friends in the business.
Funny as hell, kind, just a great person to be around. Second most infectious laugh in the business, in my opinion. Of course, Ray the Crippler Stevens to me will always be first there, but in fact, we were all there together at the wake.
Yeah,
and it was the fact that it was a year ago is like wow. But seeing Adnan, it just I was at least thankful that I was to see him alive one more time down in Stillwater at the MAW show. At least I got to see him and see that smile and hear that laugh. He had obviously aged in terms of his body physically. You know, he wasn't moving around as well and so forth, but it was still Adnan. The only thing that was missing when I saw him in Stillwater that day was he didn't smell like garlic as much as he had smelled like garlic in the past. And he loved his garlic, there's no doubt.
Yeah, well, we didn't, because it preceded him into a room. And yeah, and as far as, you know, how Adnan looked, he didn't. Yeah, you know what? Adnan hadn't moved a muscle in the ring for 10 years prior to that. You know, Adnan taking a bump was turning his shoulder so a guy could, you know, give him a forearm shot. But God love the Sheik.
I love we're talking about him taking the bumps when somebody would chop him or chop, you know, the Wahoo chop or overhand punch, whatever. He would crouch down and then fall back like a 3-year-old toddler would do if you were playing with him. And I always laughed at that, and I remembered as a kid thinking, that explains why he is managing more than wrestling anymore.
But I called him on that one time. I called him on not taking the bumps and the shots, you know, and I got why should I take the bumps? I took them for 40 years. You know, okay, all right. Okay, that's fine. I got it. I don't stick that sword up my ass again.
Again.
So God love him. God love him.
Good. It's so nice to hear you guys just like casually in retrospect talk about someone like that, because it just gives some of us who were not around him just the appreciation for the individual that he was. And hopefully that's kind of the feel, that's the goal of this podcast, is to just give people the happy feelings of what the AWA was and the personalities, because you guys knew him, you guys were around him. That's something that a lot of us didn't get. And this is why I feel like this podcast in particular is just so important for the history of the wrestling business, especially those in the upper Midwest and, based in Minneapolis where we're at.
Well said, buddy. And that's the intent. That's the goal. I think we do it well. So let's go back, 49 years?
1975. I was 10 years old at the time. So let's get rolling back to 1975. And Mick, let's start off with, who were the AWA singles champions at the start of 19?
Well, hold on. Are you guys not going to wish me a happy birthday for 1975? That's kind of the whole. That's kind of the whole point of doing the show.
That's the whole podcast, isn't it? That really, truly is.
Yeah. Well, until you guys decide to tell me happy birthday for 1975, I'll take it from here. This is the boss, Vern Gagne. This is okay. Enough of that.
Well, there
right,
go the ratings.
Happy birthday.
Rating. Yes, go ahead.
There we go. Yeah.
There you go, guys.
You asked Joe who the singles champion was going into 1975. It was Mr. Gagne. It was not that way at the end of 1975. We had a different world heavyweight champion, and his name was Nick Bockwinkel. November 8th, 1975, Vern's seemingly endless grip on the AWA championship came to a sudden halt in St. Paul, Minnesota. And I've said this before, I was there, but I didn't expect it to stick. There was some interference. There's the GOAT, as far as I'm concerned. There was some interference on the part of the referee. Well, no, it wasn't the referee's interference. He called him as he saw him. There was some interference on the part of Bobby Duncombe. So I'm expecting, they're going to overturn this and Vern is going to get the championship back, but that was not the case. And Vern handed the belt off and his trust off to Nick Bockwinkel. And again, November 8th, 1975.
So where the hell was Stanley Blackburn that time?
It's interesting because the storyline was, this is one of the rare times that nobody was filming the AWA championship match. So Stanley Blackburn had nothing to review. He had to look at his collection of over 18 35 millimeter tapes, probably in his Amarillo abode. But no, there was no video. Stanley could not review anything, couldn't overturn the decision, and Bockwinkel was the champ.
Hey, Mick, where did the title change happen? Was it in St. Paul?
It was in St. Paul. Yeah, it was in St. Paul.
St. Paul Auditorium?
St. Paul Auditorium, yes. And the interesting thing is, I had mentioned that the referee, and we'll get to him a little bit later on, there was Paul Pershman. There was a coin toss before the match to see who would referee. It would either be Paul Pershman or it would be a guy named Khosrow Vaziri. And Pershman won the toss. He was the referee of note. And funny thing, Paul wound up being closely associated with the Nick Bockwinkles and Ray Stevens of the world after the title match.
So were you a member of did you have the Bockwinkel Brigade at this point?
It was 4 years strong.
Okay, so did you know, like, you were not tipped off about the title change, right? So this was all. So what was your reaction then, being the member of the leader of the Bockwinkel Brigade then?
Ecstasy. I was totally, once I knew that the decision was sticking and that they actually had given Nick the championship, and Nick was literally 5 years into his AWA run. He had come in the fall of 1970. So it's not like he didn't pay his dues. Vern trusted him explicitly,
Mhm.
and the rest is history.
Well, and at that point, when Vern lost the title, let's see, 1975, Vern was born in
26.
26, so it was
49.
49 years old. And, you
Yep.
know, actually, what was it in January? Or no, it's November, you said. So, yeah,
Yep.
49 years old when he lost the belt for the last time.
Yes, sir. There we have the team that came into 1975 as the World Tag Team Champions. So 1975 was a pretty damn good year for Mr. Bockwinkel. Ray Stevens and Nick Bockwinkel had won the championship, and Nick came in with the tag team title in 75. And that was another reason I thought, you know, this isn't going to stick. Nick just had a tag team championship. They're not going to put another belt on him this fast. But they actually did. And I love that old school picture of Nick and Ray. Now, to your delight and to my dismay, they lost the title in the summer of 1975 to the Crusher and Dick the Bruiser, who held it for about a year before they lost it to Bobby Duncombe and Jack Lanza. So the tag team titles went from Bockwinkel and Stevens to Crusher and Bruiser. Heavyweight championship went from Vern to Nick Bockwinkel.
So I'm getting my timeline sort of straightened out. So in 1975, the Bobby Heenan family did not hold all three belts until later in the year.
Correct. That's
okay.
Correct.
So Nick won it in November, and then Duncombe and Lanza won it in July, you said?
Well, Duncombe and Lanza won it in 76. Crusher and Bruiser had won the title from Bockwinkel and Stevens in the summer of 75. Then about a year later, it went to Duncombe and Lanza. So,
okay.
And again, look at that talent roster. Oh, my God, look at the guys that were on top in the AWA.
So when it comes to, because Joe, you brought up the Heenan family. When it comes to the Heenan family, was it common for a stable back then to have all of the belts, or was it kind of a mixing and matching? I mean, was there ever a time like before that there was one group that was the dominant one in terms of championships?
You know, as far as I can remember, there weren't that many factions, at least in the AWA, until the Bobby Heenan family. You might have a manager who would have one or two guys, but if you use the term family, you know, and the conglomerate, it was definitely Bobby Heenan's group was the one that opened the door.
So Nick in 75, was Adnan in the AWA in 75?
He was not. Adnan didn't come around for about four to 5 years later. I think he came in 79 at pretty much the same time that Tito Santana came, because that was Tito's first rivalry in the AWA. Nope. So Adnan was not here yet.
Okay. And I just brought that up because in those days, that was the only other faction or family that I recall. It was the Bobby Heenan family. And I wouldn't say it was necessarily a faction as much as, you know, like you know it today. It was just the Bobby Heenan family.
And as Bobby would say, we are not a stable. It's not the Heenan stable. We're not a bunch of horses. We're a family. Speaking of the top horses in the AWA back at the time, there they are. That is Stanley Blackburn, who appears to have borrowed Wally's sport jacket. Maybe they did a little switcheroo before the camera took the shot. But that's Stanley Blackburn and Wally Carbo, the at least on-screen hierarchy in the AWA back then. And yes, we've said this many times, Stanley Blackburn was not a fictitious person. He was a pretty wealthy guy from down in the state of Texas, friend of Vern Gagne's in Amarillo. What he was not ever was the president of the American Wrestling Association.
Little known fact about this photo is that Stanley is talking to Wally about that 25-inch console Motorola television set.
Oh boy, you won't let the guy rest.
You know, I mean, I'm not divulging any information that people don't know, but yeah, I got to throw in a shot when I can.
Listen, Stanley, you don't have to take the TV on a plane. We could ship it. We could ship it to Amarillo. It'll be right there waiting in your living room when you get home. There you go.
So what cities were being run, and like what was the main loop for the AWA back in the mid-70s?
Main loop, and it continued for a while. The AWA had a pretty consistent schedule, not necessarily in any order, but it was Minneapolis, St. Paul. It was Moline, Illinois. It was Rockford, Illinois, Omaha, Nebraska, up into Winnipeg. They would go into cities in Iowa and the Dakotas. Chicago, of course, Milwaukee. That was pretty much, so the AWA really was basically a Midwest territory at the time, with a couple of offshoots here and there. But they ran, I mean, really consistently in each of those towns. That was pretty much the loop.
What surprises me, and surprised me all along, is that the AWA really didn't go into Iowa. It you know, Wisconsin, the Dakotas, and certainly Minnesota, but Iowa was more well, what's the central states, I believe.
Yeah.
Didn't they go into Iowa? And
they did. And where they went into Iowa, the AWA was in the Quad Cities. Our friend, excuse me, Joyce Poston, of course, lived in Davenport. They had the Quad Cities, and I'm trying to remember. I know it was Rock Island, Davenport, Moline. Forgive me if I forget the mix and match there, but yeah. So the AWA went into Iowa, but they certainly didn't have a stronghold like they did in other areas, and as the central states did in Iowa.
How about the attendance then? Because with the loop that they were doing, what about the income? Was there, I mean, were there certain markets that were a little more lucrative than others? I mean, which ones seem to be the tent pole cities?
I think with the AWA, you are looking, of course, the Twin Cities, Chicago,
Winnipeg,
Winnipeg, Chicago, Minneapolis, St. Paul, and probably Milwaukee. And I should add Denver. Denver, I don't know how I forgot that, was a main stop on that AWA tour. Those were the major cities for the AWA, to some extent Omaha, but the AWA also did a lot of the, you don't even want to call them spot shows, because they would run the high school gyms at Rockford and Moline and what have you, and draw some pretty damn good crowds. I mean, by that, I mean, you know, filling the building, 2,000-3,000 people in the high school. Otherwise, they were doing pretty damn well, selling out the Milwaukee auditorium and arena. There were two sites in Milwaukee, one seated about 6,100, the other closer to 11,000-12,000. So the AWA was doing real well. The cash flow was coming in real well, and it was a pretty damn good time for the AWA.
The difference, if you will, between the Milwaukees and Minneapolises and Winnipegs is that in the smaller towns, spot shows, if you will, you didn't get the title changes.
Right.
That was kept for the big stage, if you will.
Joe, I think the only, and it's not a small town, I think the only divergence there would be Green Bay. The championship changed hands at least once or twice in Green Bay, but otherwise, yeah, it was kept for the major cities, and you would always wait for that Associated Press announcement in the newspaper, and then you knew the title was legit if they were actually exposing it to another city.
What I'm curious about there is when the title change was done in a Green Bay, I don't believe that anything was recorded.
I don't think so either. No.
You know, and so did they do it because it was Green Bay being shall we say, a smaller big town? Was it, the promoter said, hey, throw me a bone, let's get a title change here? Or was it that, okay, we got to do this title change because this guy's leaving the territory?
That was part of it. The other part of it was the element of surprise. You know, nowadays, you know, there's not going to be a WWE title change, for example, at a house show, you know, at a Topeka, Kansas or whatever. They're going to save it for the big pay-per-views. Back then, I think they were just creating the idea, hey, the championship could change in any town at any time.
Thank you, because that's where I wanted to go. Like now we know that, but back then, like you didn't think of the changes being done either on these television shows or these major markets. It was like it could change hands at a high school in you know, Kenosha, Wisconsin.
Absolutely.
Like you don't know.
That was the element of surprise. That's what they wanted to create. And they did it. You know, buy your ticket because, damn it, tonight could be the change. You know, when they would go in and cut their interviews, you know, town after town after town, you know, Bobby and Nick go out and do 5 minutes on Rockford and, you know, 2 minutes on Milwaukee. It was the same build for all the towns, but you just never knew. And that was to the credit of the AWA.
Well, we've talked about the towns. Now let's talk about the talent roster from 1975. An incredible lineup. Chris, throw up that first one, and I'm just going to say, oh, yes.
There you go. And in 1975, this guy was a full-fledged babyface. You know, certainly he had made his transition from the wilds of Argentina, from the pampas, you know, eating koala trees or whatever he did. Pampero Firpo with his claw hold that he called El Garfio. And he actually had a long-standing feud with Baron von Raschke. The Baron was still a heel at the time, and it was the Baron's claw against Pampero Firpo's El Garfio. The interesting thing about old Pampy is that he was in a tag team match, in a loser leave town tag team match, and his tag team won, and Pampero left town. So I'm not sure if he understood the yeah. I don't think he quite understood the terms of the contract.
Well, he had done everything that he needed to. He wanted to go on to some other grasses.
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, he went on to some other grass, all right, because he boarded that plane, presumably back to the Pampas and the wild bulls that he shared a drink with out there. But yeah,
I've never heard that. I'm sorry. I don't mean to be like my cackles are over.
No, isn't that something? Yeah, his team won the match, and by God, he left town. Wait a minute, Pampero, you don't understand.
Another guy that wasn't.
Oh, sorry.
He was here in 75, but he really wasn't around for a long run, as in many years. But in 1975, we've got a guy who had the lumberjack gimmick. And if Tubbsy can get the photo up, we're talking about none other than
keep going, keep going. I know it's there. I know it's there. You got to keep going.
Yeah.
Keep going.
$1.5 million a year they pay this guy.
We're talking about Big Joe LeDuc. There we go.
Where are you? There's Big Joe. Nicely done, Chris.
I wanted to make him sweat, see?
Yeah, no. Chris comes out of the Larry Zbyszko school of posting photographs. Big Joe LeDuc, who went on to fame as a vicious heel in other parts of the country. Here in the AWA area, Joe was a beloved babyface. He teamed up with Larry Hennig. I believe they called themselves the original Axe and Double Axe. Joe was a fan favorite, big, strong guy, had a raging feud with Mad Dog Vachon here. Bloodbath on TV. The dog split Joe open. Joe LeDuc also, as a feat of strength, went down to the MTC, the Metro Transit, here in the Twin Cities, and legitimately pulled a full-sized bus as part of a feat of strength. They attached a strap to him and old Joe went trudging down the road with the bus in tow. So what a great talent. Bigger than life personality.
Entertaining, to say the least. The next guy, damn, he could wrestle. We're talking about the British Empire champ, Billy Robinson.
Billy Robinson, and that's a picture of a young Billy Robinson. He arrived in the AWA in 1971. First couple of matches on TV, nobody knew who he was. Here in the AWA area, he had, as you said, Joe, British Empire champion, although we never saw a belt here in the AWA, must have been misplaced. But his first couple of matches, he defeated both Kobayashi and Blackjack Lanza, who were mainstays in the Twin Cities area, beat them in subsequent appearances on AWA TV, and the rest is history. And I've said so many times about Billy Robinson, whether you liked his personality or not, and he was a bit of a bully. To me, his matches with Nick were the most believable, snug, hard-hitting matches that I've ever seen. And Rocky Stone used to say the same thing. The guys would stand in the back and my God, are they shooting on each other? No, they weren't, but they made it look that way.
So, Mick, you're very close to Nick, as we've divulged here many times. What was Nick's take on working Billy?
I've said this before, Joe, and I think this says it in a nutshell. When you work with Billy Robinson, you wanted to work with Billy or for Billy, not at Billy. And Nick used to say the best way to get ready for a match with Robinson is go into the locker room ahead of time, sit down and say, Billy, what do you want to do tonight? And Robinson would tell him, and Nick would go out, and that's what they would do tonight. And, so Robinson was a legitimate shooter, no question about it. Great talent in the AWA. Again, by 1975, he'd been here 4 years already, and he was here on and off into the early 1980s. One of the best of all time.
Our next talent. This was when he was actually 217 pounds, I think. We're talking about a very young Playboy Buddy Rose, or shall we say a pre-Playboy Buddy Rose. We're talking about Paul Pershman.
Another ring general, and you're right, Joe. And I'm not even sure he was 217 at this point. I know this is probably shortly after he got into the business, but Paul broke in at about 180. And can you imagine, he probably put on close to 300 pounds, sadly, before he passed. But he was a great talent even then. The first time he went out for Vern Gagne's training camp, he didn't make it. But he had the stick-to-itiveness and the drive and the determination to come back a second time. And he was one of those early enhancement talents that the AWA thought highly enough of to team him with the Pockwinkles and the Blackjack Lances and whoever else the heels of the day were. And, of course, transforming into Playboy Buddy Rose, just a phenomenal transformation, ring general, my good friend, and what a talent. What a talent he was.
And I'd be remiss if I didn't give him the kudos and the compliments that even when he got up into that 271 pound range, he could still do a cartwheel. He could still do a kip up. There's guys who are in shape who wouldn't be able to do that, but he could. And he could work a crowd and he could work a ring. Just incredible. We're going to go from the next guy. I don't think ever, he may have weighed 217 pounds at birth. We're talking about the Olympic great.
Damn, Joe. What does Taylor ever do to you? No, I'm just.
Chris was, I don't think he was ever a small, he was massive. Not only girth, but height-wise. He was a big dude.
Chris Taylor was 6'3", 6'4", and every bit of 450 pounds. And, he wrestled, of course, in the Olympics. I believe he took a bronze medal. When Vern brought Chris into the business, there was a lot of hoopla. It made the local newspapers. They were really touting Chris as the next, pardon the expression, big thing. They mentioned Vern signing him to a bonus contract. Whether or not that was just BS, I don't know. But Chris Taylor sadly never reached his full potential. Couldn't cut a promo. I don't think he ever really, managed beyond a C- level in promo cutting. He was a big guy. He was a lumbering guy. He took to the business as best as he could. And unfortunately, Chris was injured. I believe he cut his leg open on a ring post or something, got an infection, got phlebitis, and then it went downhill from there, and he passed at a very young age. Chris Taylor could have been bigger, not physically, but he certainly could have made more of a splash in the wrestling business than he did. And I still remember, I love this. There's going to be a battle royal in St. Paul where the names are drawn from a hat for the undercard. And Marty O'Neill's drawn one name at a time. And he draws the name of Andre the Giant. And then without drawing another name, he says, and his opponent looks at the same sheet of paper, Chris Taylor. And I don't know, Marty must have been clairvoyant, a little Christian, but yeah, a great memory. And Chris Taylor, one of the great wrestlers from Iowa, and sad ending to the big man's journey.
From one fantastic amateur wrestler and Chris Taylor, moving on to our next guy. What I love about the next guy, I loved his social media in the later years. And in particular, he had a disdain for a certain other big man in the wrestling world. Yeah. And he would often say, fuck you, Hulk Hogan. We're talking about Khosrow Vaziri, or better known as the Iron Sheik.
Look at Khosrow there. Khosrow trained here in the United States. He was one of the greatest amateur wrestlers of all time, and that is a shoot. When he came over from Iran, Vern was salivating all over to sign this kid. And I don't think Khosrow weighed 200 pounds, maybe dripping wet when he first broke in to the wrestling business. Clean cut, and again, scientific wrestler, and the evolution, the transformation into the bulbous Iron Sheik, later on legendary in the business, but that is a young Khosrow Vaziri.
So here's a question that I've got, because we just had Chris Taylor and now we've got Khosrow. Vern really liked amateur wrestlers, real athletes, so to speak. Was there ever a point that, like, could you tell when a guy could make it? Did Vern ever, could you tell when a guy could do it and when he couldn't, when Vern basically gave up on a real wrestler? Because I would think that these guys having the ability, he would have given them a little bit longer rope, a little bit more leeway to kind of get their career going.
I think what happens, Chris, is you never know how the butterfly is going to turn out from the cocoon. And I think that's what happened in the case of Khosrow, in the case of Dennis Stamp, guys like that. Vern, you just don't know. And even a guy like Ric Flair.
I feel like he'd give them a longer leash.
Yeah, he did, and yet back then a lot of Vern's trainees left right away and went on to other things. They didn't have that long tenure in the AWA. Okay. Whether it was Flair or Sergeant Slaughter or any of these guys, Ricky Steamboat, they all got their, legs underneath them. And when they were sufficiently trained, they were off and running. So I don't know if it's a matter of Vern giving him the leash. I think he trained him. He got his money for training him. And whether or not he had a deal with other promoters, I know he had that 10% deal with the guys that he trained. At least he tried to maintain that you pay me 10% no matter where you get booked. But you just never know how somebody's going to turn out. And in the case of Khosrow, you would never have expected the Iron Sheik character.
Well, I think a part of it was the way wrestling was back in the day with the territories. There was always, I don't know, maybe expectation is too strong of a statement, but there was the possibility of them coming back into the territory.
Right.
It's not like it is now, you know, guys are under contracts and okay, the contract is over and they're going to go sign another big deal somewhere else. They were all free agents. And so they were able to come in and, you know, be that surprise tag team partner or the surprise opponent for a championship match. So it's a different time, but you're right, Mick. I mean, the names that you rattled off, the Ric Flairs, the Cosgrove, the Ricky Steamboats, we're talking about legitimate Hall of Fame wrestlers.
And that's to credit Vern Gagne. The
No doubt about it.
legacy of Vern lived on.
Now, this next guy, yeah, special place in my heart, Ivan Putski, or as Jesse would call him, Ivan Paduski.
Ivan Putski, our good buddy, old Joe Benarski out of Texas, came into the AWA and he made a big splash here. He did. He teamed up with the likes of the Crusher. They were a tremendously popular tag team. As you said, he feuded with Jesse Ventura later on. He feuded with superstar Billy Graham in the AWA area. Ivan back then, you know, this I believe was pre-steroids. He was not the tallest guy in the world. He was a brick shithouse. And of course, a lot of people compared him to the mighty Igor with a little bit of cologne added. But he did the same kind of a not quite Mensa Polish wrestler, refugee, whatever it might be. And he certainly made a splash, let alone that time on television when Wally had to interpret for him, you know, which was probably Ivan's high spot here in the AWA. No, but in all seriousness, he was over and he was over big and he could brawl. And big name in the history of wrestling. And of course, a couple of years here in the AWA.
I remember seeing him later on, and he went from this stocky, thick wrestler to really more cut. He had leaned out his stomach, but still maintained his muscles. It was like, that's not the same guy that I remember, but it was indeed Ivan Paduski.
Yes.
We talked about our next photo earlier on, part of the Bobby Heenan family. And Chris is going to stretch this one out again, but we're talking about Nick Bockwinkel, Ray Stevens, and look at that. I mean, what? I'm like in awe just looking at this photo of these three.
Joe, you know, when people correlate the Bobby Heenan family with his family in the WWF, whether it was John Studd or Andre the Giant or Hercules or whoever it was, no. This is the Bobby Heenan family, and we mentioned this is where it got started here in the AWA. Bobby had managed other tag teams, you know, around the horn, managed Chris Markoff and Angelo Poffo, managed the Valiant Brothers. So he had, you know, done it all as far as a manager in the business when he broke in. But with the Bockwinkel and Stevens and Heenan, it was just incredible. And his first interview, if you remember, he came into the ring when the High Flyers and Bockwinkel and Stevens were going to get into it on TV. And Bobby said, when you see Bobby Heenan, you're going to see Nick Bockwinkel, Ray Stevens. When you see Ray Stevens, you're going to see Bockwinkel and Heenan. And that's the way it is. And legendary. To me, this epitomizes 1970s AWA.
I hated those three so much. And as Nick always said, then I've done my job well. And they did.
Oh, they were the greatest. Heat man.
So we're going to hit the road on the next one. We're going to go and present a truck driver, not the greatest wrestler in the world. I liked him just because of the ski at the end of his name. And again, being a 10-year-old Polish kid, I enjoyed him. And of course, when he would go, Bolinski. What can you tell us about the truck. Oh, by the way, so take a look at this photo really close. And I brought this up in our pre-production meeting. Did he not know how to put on the sunglasses the right way? Because it certainly looks like those are upside down. Does it not?
It does. And I wasn't going to bring that up. I certainly know how much you admire this guy. But I think the proof is in the pudding there, Joe. It looks like his glasses are, in fact, upside down. At least he has the cigar in the right orifice. That could have been a disaster. Bo Belinsky, you said he was not the greatest wrestler in the world, and he wasn't, but he was over. And he came along at the time of the nationwide truck drivers strike. And he came into the AWA under the guise of an out-of-work truck driver and wound up teaming up with the Crusher. The Polish combination. And I'm not even sure, seriously, now that I'm thinking about it, if Belinsky was legitimately Polish or not. His real name was Frank Shields. Had wrestled as the Boston Wrecker.
Well, I mean, he put his sunglasses on upside down, so he kind of has to be.
You're right. You're right. You answered my question there. But wait a minute. Wait a second. There. There we go. Yeah, he was legit. All right. Yeah, you see that lineage there. Belinsky.
Sorry, Joe. I love you.
No, we're good. We're good.
Belinsky had come into the AWA about 6 years prior to this, so he had been around for a while as well. His better days were behind him, teaming with Crusher. It kind of went downhill for the old Bullfrog when he lost to Nick Bockwinkel on television in 1971, the first real heel movement upward for Nick. But Belinsky was sticking around. He was still in and out of the AWA territory, and the fans loved him because he was every man. And, he might have forgotten how to put his glasses on. As long as he knew how to put his false teeth in and put his hat on, he did all right.
We're going to move on to, shall we say, a couple of brothers. They weren't around for very long here in the AWA. One of them came back later on. We're talking about the Valiants.
If my memory serves me correctly, and that's a great picture of the Valiants, who, of course, were not legitimate brothers. Imagine that in professional wrestling.
No.
Yeah, I know. Sit down, Joe. It'll be all right. Oh. I believe it was the Valiant brothers that wrestled Furbo and I believe the Baron or someone when Pampero, didn't quite understand the rules of the match. The loser leave town and exited stage left. The Valiant brothers were good from a personal standpoint, and maybe it was just in the AWA, the way they were utilized. They were over, but I didn't quite get the hoopla about the Valiant brothers. Certainly Johnny was the talker of the team, and Handsome Jimmy was the showman of the team, and that, of course, continued on long after they left the AWA. They were big, working for Bobby Heenan and Dick the Bruiser in the Indianapolis and Chicago territory. But, yeah, you know what? I just never quite got it. But, hey, they're a Hall of Fame tag team. They held championships everywhere. And as you said, Joe, cup of coffee in the AWA, kind of in and out.
And, of course, later on, Luscious Johnny Valiant was the first manager of Hulk Hogan in the AWA. And Luscious Jimmy, I remember seeing it years later when he developed the Boogie Woogie Man character. Shall we say, gimmick. You got to give that one a gimmick. Now, the next guy was a walking, talking, living, breathing gimmick. We're talking about none other than the American Dream. In my opinion, one of the greatest interviewers and talkers in the business.
No question about it. And again, think of this talent roster that we're going through. They were all here at the same time, folks, in the AWA. We got an awful lot of legends on this list in 1975. Dusty and, of course, Dick Murdoch. A couple of years early, he came into the AWA as a heel tag team, the Texas Outlaws. They eventually turned Dusty babyface, along with superstar Billy Graham, who turned babyface in the AWA about the same time. What can you say about Dusty Rhodes that has not been said? Charismatic to a fault. I don't think anybody in the business really has had the overall charisma of Dusty Rhodes. Big time stuff here in 1975.
I don't remember Dusty as a heel, as a villain. Was he a better babyface or a heel?
He did really well at both.
Yeah.
As a heel, it was these Texas madmen that would come into a city, a town, and brawl in the local bar, legit. They would use the tables and chairs on the outside of the ring, rough and tough. They would, always denigrate the people up north. So they were very, very good as the Texas Outlaws. Can an argument be made that they were better or Dusty was better as a heel? I don't think so. I think wrestling fans will go down remembering Dusty Rhodes as the charismatic son of a plumber, the American dream that everybody loved.
He was over in both regards.
Yes, he was.
No doubt about it. Now, this next one, I have to admit, I don't remember him being here. He's certainly a legend in the business, legendary name. I don't remember him being a part, so he must have been here for a cup of coffee, as you like to say. Mil Mascaras.
He came into the AWA, and I don't think that the plan was to have Mil stay for any length of time because he was a world traveler. He was booked everywhere. Came into the AWA in 1975, and again, as you said, Joe, that proverbial cup of coffee. The interesting thing about Mil Mascaras is that he didn't get over in the AWA, at least a couple of times that I saw him wrestle. This just did not seem to be his turf, whether or not it was the style, whatever. But, he had his reputation in the wrestling magazines. Everybody knew who Mil Mascaras was. Specifically out on the West Coast, he did tremendously well all over the country. But when he got to the AWA, it was in and out, and just the pop was just not there. And it really surprised me. He hadn't changed his style at all. It was the same Mil Mascaras, but it just didn't get over, which is interesting because, you think of Pedro Morales, the same kind of a situation. Pedro was a superstar all over the country, but just did not click with the fans in the upper northern tier of the United States.
So when Vern brought somebody like that in, how long would it be before you realized that somebody wasn't getting over, it didn't work, and then they would pull the plug? Did Vern try and give it a little bit of time, or was he just like, okay, after X amount of shows, it's not working and we need to move on?
I think in the case of Mascaras and Morales too, Chris, I don't think that there was probably a long-term intent for either of those guys.
Come in, pop the territory, and leave?
Exactly. They had the worldwide reputation. Mascaras, I think, even was less over than Pedro Morales was. I think with Mil, if he was going to be here for any length of time, Vern took a look at the response he was getting. And Mil was not the easiest guy to work with, as I understand. Didn't like to put guys over at all. His reputation was like that. So maybe Vern just looked, what? Let's not expend any more time or money on this one.
So our next guy, I got to admit, I don't even recognize the name. And I'm guessing that he was here just long enough to get the cup, but not necessarily get the coffee. Hugo Babbage.
Hugo Babbage. Danny Babbage also wrestled as Hugo Babbage. He was a Canadian wrestler. And the reason I put him up here is because he was one of these guys, came in and out of the AWA, as you said, real quickly. He cut some television interviews. They started to put him over on television. They gave him some opening match victories or draws in Minneapolis and St. Paul around the horn of the AWA. Here's where it got interesting with Hugo, and I really liked him. His character to me was just starting to develop. Maybe there was some room for growth there. He wrestled Vern, of all people, on a television match on television, and I remember Hugo was not hitting on
he wrestled a
cylinders.
television match on television.
On television, as opposed to the radio.
Right. Okay.
Or on a television.
Just to clarify.
Quite painful. You don't want to take the body slam.
And Wally provided the TV.
You won't let it go, will you? Yeah, just the guy can't rest. What I was saying about Hugo, he went into the ring with Vern on television, and it was going to be a Gagne victory. But poor Hugo, he messed up a couple of spots. And if I recall correctly, not only did he get a couple of serious slaps across the face from Vern and a couple of forearms, but Vern clamped the sleeper on Hugo like a vice. And I mean, he put it on him. You would think if he squeezed any harder, his head was going to become a missile. And shortly after that, maybe immediately after that, Hugo was gone. Imagine that. I don't think it was from the sleeper hold. I think he probably went back into the locker room area at TV, and Vern said, "Here's your pink slip," or Wally did, and Hugo was gone. But it was a good talent, good interviews, but never made it here in the AWA.
Hugo Babbage, more like Hugo. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Oh, hey.
Did Hugo make it big in another territory, Mick?
Hugo wrestled a lot in Canada. He
Okay.
was over there, and again, I had mentioned he used a couple of names: Danny Bobic, Hugo Bobic, and Hugo Bobic. But sadly, here in the AWA, you fuck up in a match with Vern Gagne on television. I don't think your tenure is going to be very long. Kind of like, fucking up an announcement in Las Vegas. As an announcer, your tenure at the AWA is not going to be very long.
Well, let's move on to the next guy who the argument could be made. He could talk. If you took the three of us combined, we couldn't talk as much as Rock Riddle.
Rock Riddle to this day, and Chris will attest to this because we've interacted with Rock at Waterloo, and I, of course, have had the opportunity to interact with him in Vegas as well at Cauliflower. He is one crazy, in a good way, individual. Rock could talk your arm off, as you said. Rock, when he's scheduled to deliver a speech at a convention at noon, he shows up at 10 o'clock and starts talking. He doesn't care if the fans have entered the building or not, and he's still talking 2 hours after they left. Here in the AWA area, he was used as kind of a glorified one step above an enhancement guy. Had all the potential in the world. In other territories he was over. Of course, I mentioned on last week's show, he was a fan from a young age, had the fan club for Rip Hawk and Sweet Hansen. And here in the AWA, just didn't quite get there.
The next guy we've got on our list, I know, is one of your favorites, Mick. None other than Larry Heineme.
Larry Heineme, in terms of whether or not, and by the way, Crusher is a loser, that T-shirt, he owned a T-shirt shop, did Larry Heineme. He was part of Shirt Shack here in the Twin Cities area, and I think he probably, probably printed that one up himself.
I love that. It's like the beginning of the novelty shirt era.
Absolutely, it was. It was great, and he and Buddy Wolf, his tag team partner, would wear, also with Wahoo McDaniel, they would have Squahoo. Imagine that, trying that today. Squahoo is a loser T-shirt. But Larry Heineme, a.k.a. Lars Anderson, legendary tough guy in the business. I know that our friend Mr. Pershman did not exactly get over with him at training camp and was brutalized by Larry Heineme out of St. Cloud State University, but legendary, specifically as Lars Anderson.
And you brought up his name when you were talking about Larry Heineme. Our next is our good friend, Buddy Wolf, or Beautiful Buddy Wolf, as I believe.
Beautiful Buddy, yes. God bless him, passed away a few years ago. Les Wolf. And he was a college teammate and friend of Larry Hynemi's in St. Cloud, Minnesota. To me, again, I've said this many times, he was so underrated. He was a tremendous heel. He actually, put over Muhammad Ali during the time when they were promoting the Ali-Antonio Inoki fight on ABC's Wide World of Sports. Buddy and Kenny J both kind of did the job for Ali. Buddy was great, and he was in town as a heel. And again, I mentioned that he and Hynemi wrestled the Crusher and Wahoo in singles and tag team matches, and they were very much the heels. After the Ali match in Chicago on Wide World of Sports, or I should say exhibition, wasn't actually a match, Buddy became a babyface in the AWA area, and as a matter of fact, had a title shot against Nick Bockwinkel when Nick was the heel champ here in the AWA. A great, great guy. He was an inventor. He was well-rounded, and sadly, we lost Buddy, I believe, to Alzheimer's just a couple of years ago.
Did he become a babyface because of what he did with Ali, or was that just kind of okay?
No, he absolutely. It's kind of the way John Nord became a babyface because of the car commercials.
Because of commercials, sure. Like you see him at a different light, and he's not the character, and he's more of himself. And then you're like, oh, people start to actually kind of get behind him. I wasn't okay. Well, that's interesting for kind of back in the day, because today we see it more and more where personalities are detached from their wrestling personas. Yes. And it's just kind of interesting when you mention that. I wouldn't have thought about that.
Yep, that's exactly why it happened.
So we would be remiss if we did not bring up, all I can say, the next one is character is a very gross understatement for our next photo, and it is none other than my clutch.
If you look at that hairstyle, I don't know if you guys ever saw a pair of Buster Brown shoes back in the day.
I don't even know what those are.
Yeah, I want you to Google it on the internet. Buster Brown, he had a dog, Tig, and they were the spokespersons for Buster Brown shoes. And that guy right there, that guy who is probably 100 pounds heavier today, a lot more gray, probably should have listened to his inner self and gotten away from the wrestling business when this picture was taken in 1975. At least his glasses are on correctly. They're not upside down. But yeah, that is the future Slick One. 4 years into the Bockwinkel Brigade, effectively 12 years from starting with the AWA. Good God. I look at these pictures and I'm being serious now. I think, where the hell did I go? It's you look at them and it's a blast from the past, and how fast did the time go? 25, 30, 40 years.
You are one leather jacket away from becoming a member of the T-Birds and hanging with Kaniki and Danny Zuko.
Well,
might be 2 leather jackets away. Yeah, go ahead.
Two comments. Mick, you talk about, if you could have told yourself something. I am going to say, in all seriousness, if you could transport yourself back in time to that photo, you would not have told yourself to get out of the wrestling business. Let's face facts. You love this business, as we all do. Am I wrong?
No, you're absolutely right, Joe. The difference is back then, I assumed that if I ever got into the business, I would make money.
Well, yeah.
And that may have been where I was sadly misguided. But yeah, this has been in my blood since I'm 9 years old, and having established that relationship with Nick for 4 years at that point, yeah, I was hooked.
Well, and my other point was, go back to the Mick picture, if you would, please.
Oh,
Chris.
God.
Okay. I don't know where this is going, but I like it.
You had brought up he was one leather jacket away from whatever it was you said.
The T-bone, well, from the Grease, from the movie Grease.
You know, I got two things. First, you know, it could look a little bit like Bowser from what was the name of that group? Sha-Na-Na. But I'm going to go a step further. Maybe not as cool as the next photo that we're going to call up, but put a leather jacket on, and we have a very, you could say, a resemblance to none other than Arthur Fonzarelli.
Hey,
wow. Look at it. Hey, Fonzie is putting over the AWA Unleashed podcast. I love that. We get endorsements from all over the world, from celebrities, George Clooney, Arthur Fonzarelli, you name it, we got them. Love this.
Well, and you know, you take a look at that, and it's AWA Unleashed with a big black marker on a cardboard box that's cut out. That's perfect, because that would have been, or that is, our budget for promoting AWA.
That's our yearly advertising budget right there.
That's right, and that's because the cheapskates out there can't pop for $4.99 a month. So we are resigned to finding an old cardboard box, tearing it up, and getting a magic marker and doing that.
Well, by the way, let's for those that are not cheapskates, I'm going to give the shout out. I'm going to start mine right away from Jason Marinos, because he's the one that did that. He got to hook up with Arthur Fonzarelli, Henry Winkler. So thank you, Jason, for what you do, and taking the podcast to Milwaukee during an AEW taping a couple of weeks ago. So absolutely, that picture popped me, and thank you for doing that. Jason's a part of our pinfall membership. If you guys want to be a part of it, I'm telling you guys, honestly, it's so good. We have live chats. We've got interviews that are available only to our Patreon. You get the podcast a day early. You get a letter from me. You get stickers, magnets, pictures from Mick.
Watch-alongs.
The watch-along, which I asked folks in our last live chat last Sunday night, hey, what do you guys think about it? And it's like, I love it. It's great. They love the watch along. It's kind of like an AWA version of Mystery Science Theater 3000, MST 3K. So just a lot of really good things. It's $4.99. You guys, it's probably the best value in all of the wrestling podcast Patreons. I guarantee you try the $4.99, you won't want to cancel, because you're going to get more than your money's worth. So there's my pitch for it. And Jason did it. Jason's been a part of it, and thank you, Jason, for helping us out.
My shout out this week goes to a good friend of ours, legendary wrestler in the AWA. I'm talking about our buddy Jake the Milkman Milliman. And Jake, we have wanted to get him on the podcast for so long. He's had a myriad of health issues over the past couple of years. Just recently had some surgery and lost part of a leg. There's only one Jake Milliman, and honest to God, he is right up there with everybody who was somebody in the AWA. Big fan of our podcast and our Facebook pages. So God love you, Jake Milliman. Heal up, buddy. Heal up quickly, and we want to get you on the show.
I mean, you can see who my shout out is on the crawl, but before I get to it, I do want to thank Jason. Yeah. And I'll throw this out there for AWA Unleashed fans. See something good? You want to help plug the show? By all means, grab a marker, grab a cardboard box. Hell, if you see Karch, put AWA Unleashed on his forehead. But just if you do that, make sure it's permanent marker, because we want to make the advertising last for a while.
No, give him the stash again.
I hope you guys are having a good time. Speaking of that AWA Unleashed cardboard, Vern, I think, used that for his backdrop for interviews in Whitewater, didn't he?
No. If it was in Whitewater, the mark would have been thin line.
You're right. Yeah,
but
little cheaper.
Exactly. But I'm going to, I guess, wrap this one up. I'm going to give my shout out to what we're going to have on our next podcast. We've been asked to get him on the show for a long time. I've talked to him for a long time about doing it, and it was about time. My shout out is going to go out to Greg Gagne, the son of Vern Gagne, part owner of the AWA. My longtime friend, 39 years now since I started working with the AWA. Greg will be on our podcast. Heck, could be for the next couple of episodes. We'll see how long it goes, but we've got questions from our fans. We will get most of them answered. I don't know if we'll have time for all of them, but you will hear from Greg Gagne about the league that we all love, the AWA. I'm looking forward to it.
And if people have questions, Joe, where do they send their questions? Where do they email their questions to if they want? Because like you said, there's no guarantee all of the questions will get answered. But if you do have a question for Greg, where do they send it?
AWA Unleashed Podcast at gmail.com.
Perfect.
The most anticipated and requested guest that we've ever had on this show by a country mile.
Greg is a storyteller. He's got some great stories. Yeah, on occasion. And this is not just for Greg. You take anybody and have them tell you a story, and then 6 months later have tell the story again. There might be some embellishment. Some things might slightly change. I like to put that in the category of the stories just become a little bit more legendary, shall we say. That's the kayfabe way of saying that it's a different story. But nonetheless, the stories will be told by Greg Gagne.
Looking forward to that. I got to get going, guys. I got a magic marker and a mustache to draw on. So I'll do that. And, cover my whole face for you, Chupik, you asshole. And, we'll see you next week with Greg Gagne.
Can you do the unknown comic thing? Just put a paper bag over your head and draw it in?
I can easily do that. Can you do the unknown podcast co-host and just disappear altogether?
I sure can.